A few of you had asked about, the fascia, which is part of our somatic anatomy that we don't really talk about all that much. And I just thought I'd say a couple things about it because a few of you were asking about it, what it was that I was referring to, what it was that I was speaking about. Um, and so when we speak about the body holding memory, and some of you may be familiar with the different types of memory that we have, sort of explicit, implicit memory, procedural, autobiographical, etc. But when we talk about how the body holds memory, we often think of things like, our muscles tightening, sort of maybe our breath becoming shallow, the nervous system sort of clenching and bracing. But, and the fascia, which is that connective tissue webbing, that sort of surrounds and interpenetrates every muscle, organ, cell. It also carries a sort of embodied sort of remembrance. The fascia remembers what the mind often forgets. And the fascia, it's not just some sort of inert wrapping, which you might hear it described as in a conventional sort of anatomy book, but it's living, innervated tissue, and it's highly sensitive, to tension, to compression, and to that subtle sort of emotional tone. And it's been called at times, or sometimes it's referred to as the body's inner fabric, which is pretty rich, really. Fluid yet tensile, sort of shaping the pathways through which our aliveness moves. And so, as we've been speaking about over the last weeks, months, years, decades, when an experience is too overwhelming to process, and we've all had experience in our lives that overwhelm our capacity to process that experience in the moment, to digest it, to assimilate it, to metabolize it. We borrow these words, of course, from the field of biological science, but they do have a somatic, they do have a soul type of, they're analogous in soul. So whenever we have because it's important to remember, right? Just because we have an experience, just because something is registered, in one of the five senses or with the mind, with the brain, the nervous system, having an experience isn't the same thing as digesting, processing, metabolizing, and certainly not integrating that experience. So those experiences that are just too overwhelming, they overwhelm our capacity for information processing, terror, trauma, grief, shame, rage, these really survival level experiences. What happens, of course, is that, speaking psychologically, of course, as we've been talking about, that experience is sort of sequestered into underground storage, those underground storage areas that we refer to psychologically as the shadow, as if it were a place, the shadow. Or mythologically, it's taken down into the underworld by our friend Persephone or Hermes. Hermes is the connective tissue, the fascia of the mythological world. Hermes helps the different gods, goddesses to sort of link up to one another that wouldn't normally be in touch with one another. They sort of hang in their own realms. Hermes is the linking agent within the mythological world and also within the psyche. Hermes is a very important figure in the world of alchemy, of course. Certainly Hermes and Sophia, we might say, are the two of the most important guides of the, for the alchemist. That's a whole other story though, isn't it? But in those moments when we're not able to process or digest experience, it's just too much. We don't have the resources to do it on our own. And or there's not a safe other that can lend us a soothed nervous system in which we can come together in our window of tolerance, where we can borrow a soothed nervous system from them, which can help us to metabolize, digest, process what we otherwise just couldn't do on our own. So in those moments when we can't find those inner resources and there's no one to help, as we've spoken about, the nervous system may, it's the right word, the nervous system might offload, that intensity sort of into the body, psychologically into the shadow, mythologically down into the underworld. From a neurophysiological perspective, that material goes into the body, into those subcortical limbic circuitries, tissue, organ, breath, posture, gesture. And the fascia, just to get back to the fascia, with its sort of responsiveness and its permeability as it receives that offload, can stiffen or bind or hold sort of patterns of contraction in place long after the original event, right, has passed. Because remember, with trauma, relational wounding, any experience that we're unable to hold or digest, there's the actual event, like something did happen to us that shouldn't have happened. That's a big part of what we know of as trauma, right? But there's the other half. That's something that didn't happen, that really we needed to happen, to be held, to have our experience mirrored back to us, to receive that empathic mirroring and resonance, to receive an adequate holding environment. But so what we've come to learn about trauma, of course, over the last decades is that trauma isn't only really that event. And in fact, over time, in large part, it's not the event that's the trauma, but it's how that material, what it is that happened or didn't happen becomes organized in the body, the nervous system, and the psyche over time.